On a quiet military base, young officers mocked an old man with a limp and a rusted bronze star pinned to his chest. They called him outdated, laughed behind his back, and shared photos of him like a joke. But when the base's entire emergency system failed and the lives of dozens hung in silence, it wasn't any of them who stepped forward. It was the same man they'd dismissed, and what he did next made the entire base stand still. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The base was quiet that morning. Too quiet for a facility known for its routine, its rhythm, its strict adherence to protocol. A soft wind brushed across the pavement outside the main gate, lifting dust and fallen leaves, while a handful of young officers lingered near the security checkpoint, sipping coffee and cracking low-volume jokes to pass the idle hour. That's when they saw him. He didn't belong, not by the way he walked, not by the creases in his uniform, and certainly not by the way time had weathered his face. The man was in his 70s, maybe older, with a limp that favored his right side and a stiffness in his posture that looked like it came from decades of carrying weight most wouldn't understand. His fatigues were clean but faded and clipped to his chest. Barely hanging by its corroded pin was a bronze star, its edges dull, its ribbon frayed. Somebody forgot their Veterans Affairs Museum tour, one lieutenant muttered under his breath. Another smirked and lifted his phone to snap a photo. Bet he tells wild stories at the nursing home, said a third. They laughed, not cruelly, but casually, the way people do when they're sure the subject can't hear or doesn't matter. The old man didn't flinch. He met none of their eyes, only offered a tired nod as he stepped past the gate, his boots scuffing softly against concrete. 3 days earlier, the base had been anything but calm. A series of readiness drills triggered by recent system failures in emergency comms and power backups had everyone on edge. Maintenance crews worked double shifts trying to trace the issue, while officers ran response simulations that kept exposing gaps no one wanted to admit existed. The pressure rolled downhill. Young officers barked at junior enlisted. Technicians scrambled through outdated schematics. And the base commander made it clear, no more surprises. In the middle of it all, a request landed on the desk of a civilian liaison. A retired non-commissioned officer named Roy Maddox had asked for temporary base access. The file showed an old maintenance badge expired years ago, and a brief note that he'd once been part of the original install team for legacy infrastructure, emergency bypasses, manual override protocols, switchboard logic no longer taught. The liaison, a civilian contractor barely in his 30s, sighed. "What's next, telegraph wires?" He muttered, stamping the clearance anyway. Let the living museum piece wander. Roy was issued a guest badge with limited access, hangars, certain utility corridors, the south compound where the old switchboard still sat boxed and forgotten. He didn't argue, didn't ask for more. He just nodded, thanked the man, and left with the kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable. That afternoon, as high-ranking officers drilled in digital protocol override, Roy Maddox stepped into the past, inspecting panels no one else had touched in 20 years. By midweek, Roy Maddox had become a fixture, quiet, predictable, and, to many of the younger officers, a curiosity bordering on comedy. Every morning, he arrived just after UO-800, wearing the same faded fatigues and walking the outer perimeter with a slow, methodical pace. He always paused at the same weathered outbuilding near the south compound, resting one hand on its rusted steel door, as if checking something only he could see. To the officers in charge of security rotations, it became a running joke. His rusted bronze star, clipped dutifully to his chest, became the centerpiece of a meme circulated in their private group chat. Battle of the Dinosaurs, Bronze Star Edition. Another showed him in black and white with the caption, "When Wi-Fi fails, call Grandpa." It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was dismissive. The kind of humor that trades humility for a laugh. Then came the Thursday inspection. A full sweep of readiness personnel was underway, with senior command staff and department heads assembling near the east bunkers. Roy, unaware of the day's schedule, happened to be walking his usual route. He paused near the utility fence, too close in one officer's opinion. "Excuse me," barked Lieutenant Avery, a sharp-tongued academy grad. "Why is some rusty old guy loitering near secure bunkers?" Heads turned. A few chuckled. No one corrected him. A base official approached Roy and said, not unkindly, "Sir, you'll have to step away from the area." Roy said nothing. He nodded once, adjusted his sleeve, and turned back the way he came. Laughter followed him like gravel under boots. But he didn't look back. As he passed through a shaft of late sun, the worn bronze star on his chest caught the light, just briefly, just enough. It happened just after 2 p.m. The base sirens erupted in a banshee wail that shattered the silence, followed by the grinding halt of generators failing across key zones. Lights flickered and died. Hallway alarms buzzed without pattern. On the tarmac, a refueling convoy froze mid-operation. Trucks stalled, hoses half-connected, emergency lockouts sealing tight around the pumps. Worse, the bay doors to the emergency response hangars locked down by fault, trapping crews inside. In the comms hub, a junior technician named Ellis stared wide-eyed at an unresponsive screen. The automated override wasn't responding. None of the touch commands registered, and the backup terminal displayed a blinking line he didn't recognize. I don't even know what this is," Ellis stammered. Across the base, the acting commander, a major filling in for the weekend rotation, paced furiously, barking orders that returned nothing but system errors and dead comlinks. "Get me someone who knows pre-digital command chains," he snapped. Silence. Confusion. Then a soft voice from the aide assigned to logistics. "Sir, there's a civilian consultant. Retired NCO, Maddox. He was given clearance this week. Something about legacy systems." The major blinked. "Why didn't anyone mention him before?" The aide didn't answer. He was already moving. Within seconds, he was sprinting across the base, dodging backup teams scrambling for flashlights and clipboards. Somewhere past the far hangars, through darkness lit only by flickering exit lights, Roy Maddox was likely sleeping. The aide found him just where he'd expected, alone in a modest garage outside the south perimeter, hunched over a disassembled switchboard panel, its brass contacts cleaned to a dull gleam. Roy looked up without surprise, as if he'd heard the alarms miles away and simply waited for the knock. "Sir," the aide said, breathless. "They need you, now." Roy didn't ask questions. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on a faded rag, and reached for his coat. The rusted bronze star still hung from it, right where it always did. Minutes later, an unmarked vehicle whisked him back through the base gates, now bathed in backup floodlights and confused shouting. Inside the operations center, officers scrambled around inert terminals, their words clipped and useless. The acting commander glanced at Roy with a mixture of doubt and desperation. "Systems locked us out," he said quickly. "Emergency protocols failed." "Nothing responds." Roy didn't respond. He stepped past the cluster of confused techs, eyes scanning the layout. Then he walked to a blank wall panel most had never noticed, an access point once used before the base upgraded to touch control. His fingers moved without hesitation, sliding open a metal plate, exposing wires that looked more like museum pieces than live hardware. He traced the leads by touch, paused at a corroded relay, and muttered, "Still here." A screwdriver turned. 2 wires crossed. A moment passed. Then, click. The lights buzzed and roared back to life, screens booted. Doors unsealed. The base exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. In the stunned silence that followed, Roy turned and walked calmly toward the command center. Officers parted to let him through. Lieutenant Avery, standing near the wall, said nothing. He only stared as the rusted metal on Roy's chest swung lightly with each step. By morning, the base had returned to normal, lights steady, radios clear, engines humming once more. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. In a closed-door meeting with senior staff, the base commander sat stone-faced as reports from the night's failure were reviewed. A technician detailed how Roy Maddox had identified a decommissioned manual bypass that none of the current personnel recognized. Another officer read aloud the list of sealed units and stalled vehicles that would have triggered a cascade of fuel pressure failures. One spark from a grounded cable. And the outcome could have been catastrophic. The commander didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We got lucky," he said quietly. Or rather, someone else remembered what we forgot. Within hours, a formal internal directive was issued. Legacy system knowledge would be reviewed and retained. A new crisis protocol was drafted requiring joint review by current engineers and retired specialists when older infrastructure remained in place. Roy Maddox's name appeared at the top of the contact list. That afternoon, the officers who'd mocked him requested a private meeting. They didn't offer speeches, just quiet apologies, hands stiff at their sides. Roy looked at them not with bitterness, but with something harder to earn. Restraint. "Glad I could help," he said. Nothing more. He left the office the same way he had come. Quiet, steady, head high. And the metal on his chest, still dulled by time and weather, remained just as it had been. Untouched. Not polished. Not replaced. Just earned. A few days later, the morning routine returned. Marching boots, clipped orders, the hum of drills resuming. But near the main checkpoint, a small change lingered. Roy Maddox sat quietly on a weathered bench beneath the shade of an old camphor tree, the same one he'd passed so often on his way in and out. In his lap rested a dented piece of switchboard equipment, wires coiled like veins which he cleaned gently with a cloth. Across from him, a young officer, Lieutenant Avery, sat in uniform, not speaking, just watching. Then slowly he asked a question. Not the kind made for mocking, the kind meant to learn. Roy answered in fragments, measured and low. No stories of heroism, no tales of medals, just process, precision. What connected to what and why? The wind carried no applause. No ceremony followed, only the hush of understanding passing from one generation to the next.